Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Continuing with this Dhamma talk called The Five Khandhas from the Luang Por Sumedho anthology, Vol.3. And we just started to explore Sanya and Sankhara together, and the tendency of the mind to identify with perception and mental formations and create the sense of I and me and mine around that. By investigating these five heaps, aggregates or groups, you begin to see them. You can know them as objects because they're anatta, not self. If they were what you are, you wouldn't be able to see them. You'd only be able to be them. You'd have no way of witnessing them or detaching from them. You'd just be caught up in them all the time, without any ability to detach and observe them. But being men, being women, monks, nuns, Italian, Danish, Swiss, English, American, Canadian, or whatever, is only a relative truth, relative to certain situations. Yet we can operate our lives from fixed positions of being, I'm American, and we're this way. Throughout the world, we have those national prejudices and racial prejudices. These are just perception and conception, sanya, sankhara, khandhas, that we can observe. When you have a fixed view about somebody, one thing I can't stand is Hondurans. Why Hondurans, I'd have no idea, but that's what came to mind when Luang Por was speaking that day. One thing I can't stand is Hondurans. You can observe that in your mind. Even if you have strong prejudices and feelings, but you try to get rid of them, that comes from assuming that you shouldn't have any prejudices at all, that you shouldn't have any bad feelings towards anybody, and you should be able to accept criticism with an equanimous mind and not feel angry or upset. That's another very idealistic assumption. See that as a condition of mind and keep observing, rather than hating ourselves or hating others for being prejudiced. We observe the very limitations of any prejudices or perceptions and conceptions of the mind. We meditate on the impermanent nature of perception. In other words, we don't try to justify, explain, get rid of, or change anything. We just try to observe that all things change, all that begins ends. So at that particular point he made at the beginning of this about the reason why we can observe things, we can contemplate things, is because they're not what we are, and that that's a frequent theme in his teachings, and that I think it's something that we forget, and that is something that is absolutely crucial to Dhamma practice. The fact that the very ability that we have to watch the mind and to know the arising and passing of things means that there isn't an absolute identification with those qualities. And that ability to watch the mind, this is really the most sort of precious and wonderful qualities. And vipassana meditation, insight meditation, is very much built around, the clarification and the strengthening of that quality, that ability to watch things arising and passing away. We don't think of it as anything special. It's kind of normal to us and familiar. So, watching my mind, or saying to somebody, oh, it's a good idea to watch your mind. That the fact that we can do that is really the most important skill that we have. And one of the passages that Luang Por would often quote, and I think is one of the most relevant sutta passages, is where he's come across a group of members of the Sangha talking together, and Venerable Ananda had been talking about the miraculous and extraordinary events around the birth of the Bodhisattva, and saying how prior to his birth, then he had been the Bodhisattva had been living in the Tusita heaven and descended into his mother's womb. How he was when she was pregnant with him, she never had any kind of discomfort. She gave birth to him standing up, and when she gave birth to him, then he immediately started walking and took 7 steps, and then started talking and said, "I am the foremost in the world. I am the leader in the world." And with each of those statements, these kind of extraordinary, amazing events of the birth of the Bodhisattva, then Venerable Ananda said, "This is another wonderful and marvelous quality of the Tathagata." So when the Buddha showed up and then asked them what they were talking about, and Venerable Ananda repeated the whole of that exposition that he'd been giving about these kind of totally amazing, strange, and wonderful aspects of his birth, he said, "Well, would you like to hear another wonderful and marvelous quality of the Tathagata?" And they said, "Oh yes, please." Expecting in the flow of the account, they seemingly expecting more extraordinary, strange, and mysterious, unusual events around his birth and so on. But what he says is, when a feeling arises in the mind of the Tathagata, he knows this is a feeling arising. As it abides in the mind, he knows this is a feeling abiding in the mind. As it fades away, he knows this is a feeling fading away in the mind of the Tathagata. This too is a wonderful and marvelous quality of the Tathagata. So too with perceptions and mental formations. So he knows them as they arise, knows them as they abide, knows them as they fade away. This too is a wonderful and marvelous quality of the Tathagata. And so that ability to watch our mind is, the Buddha is saying that's okay. It's all right. You can start walking and talking as soon as you're born. That's one thing. But the really miraculous and amazing thing is that we can watch our minds. That's what is really valuable and important. That's a wonderful and marvelous quality. So I think that the capacity that we have to be able to know thought, to know feeling, to know memory, and then to deduce from that, to have that intuition of, okay, this can be known. It's a thing that is known. Therefore, it's not what I am. It's not me. It's not mine. It's an object that's say apparent. It comes into being, does its thing, and fades away. Therefore, that's not absolutely who and what I am. That which is knowing it is not identified with that, is somehow separate, is a part, is transcendent of that. And that very ability to watch the mind and to see the implications of that was one of the most significant aspects of Luang Por Chah meeting Luang Por Mun in the very few days when he was there visiting Luang Por Mun's monastery. That during I think the final evening that he was there, and when Luang Por Chah was giving the accounts of that time he spent with Luang Por Mun, he said that one of the things that had the biggest impact on him was that Luang Por Mun clarifying that which is aware of the 5 khandhas is intrinsically transcendent of the 5 khandhas. That quality of knowing, the puru, that it transcends the 5 khandhas. It knows the 5 khandhas as they arise, take shape, pass away, but it's not limited by the 5 khandhas. It's not identified with them. It's transcendent of them. That's why liberation is possible. If the quality of knowing, if every aspect of knowing was intrinsically part of the 5 khandhas, liberation would be impossible. But it's because there is this quality of awakened awareness, which is a transcendent knowing, that lokuttara panya, then that it's because of that liberation is possible. And that really hit the young Ajahn Chah at that time. It really sort of sank in, and he saw, right, that's the whole deal. That's what really makes a difference. And so then that was a powerful insight for him, and that's I feel represented very clearly by what Luang Por is saying here. The other thing, just there in that last couple of sentences of this, Luang Por says, in other words, we don't try to justify, explain, get rid of, or change anything. We just try to observe that all things change, that all that begins ends. So I feel it's good to clarify that, because sometimes when teachers speak in these terms, it can be taken to imply a kind of passivity of just don't do anything, just watch, and I feel that's a misreading of what's really intended in terms of what's said, because in Buddha Dhamma, passivity is not the same as peace. So that, and I think I was making this point a few days ago in one of the readings, that our capacity to act is part of the way things are. It's not as though our action, our doing, and our making choices is an imposition on the way things are. It's part of the way things are. And so I feel that when we read words or hear words like this, we don't try to justify, explain, get rid of, or change anything. We just try to observe that all things change. That I would say, but also our capacity to act is part of what's changing, and that when we talk in those terms of watching, or being the observer, or being the one who knows, that embodying that quality of knowing, that's not just say going towards a sort of an unskillful dissociation, or a way of flattening our involvement, or the capacity of the mind to act and to choose. I say this over and over again, but I feel it's an important principle to really take in, because what can happen is that the vibhava tanha, the sort of desire to annihilate, or to not feel, to not be, that sort of sneaks in and takes over that. So I'm just watching. But actually what's happened is that the vibhava tanha reflex has come in the back door, as it were, and is muffling or switching off our natural attunement to a situation, and to working with the body, with our own body, or with our mind states, and so that it seems as though, or we're labeling it as just watching or just being aware, but what's actually happening is there's a lot of annihilation, a lot of switching off and not feeling, a lot of dissociation being brought into being, which necessarily brings more dukkha with it. So I feel it's very important not to misunderstand that point. Then when we talk about non-attachment or just watching, then we can just watch ourselves making choices. We can just watch as we take action and say, give direction to our life and to our mind and to our practice. So, any thoughts, questions? Yes, Anagarika, Philippe, please.
Thank you, Ajahn. My question is, I realized and I am able to watch my mind, my feeling, but when I do it, I still have this, how can I say, this feeling that, okay, there is this object, which is feeling, thought, whatever, but there is still a subject. And when I do it, I'm not what I feel, and it's kind of great, but I have a strong feeling of I am watching this. So, like, how can I, because in a way, I'm looking of it, and then I try to turn around and see but what is looking to it? But I can't. Yeah. And I have the strong feeling of, I am watching it. So yes, I am not this, but I am the watcher. And so how can I turn around and actually even not be the watcher?
Turn around really quickly.
Yeah.
It's like, there's a few different aspects to this. Yeah, one of the aspects of it is that it shows how powerful the conditioning is with around identification. That rather than just seeing, there is me seeing that what we call manyati, that conceiving, that self-conception, is incredibly strong. But what can be used to approach that is that kind of reflective inquiry. So when the mind is quite quiet and still, then to use that kind of a question like, who is it that's watching this? Yeah. Is this a person watching? Yeah. Is this awareness a person? Is this a me? And then using that kind of a questioning in a very sort of clear, deliberate, quiet way, and then for a moment, what usually happens is that I making and mind making gets interrupted. There's a sort of, in a way, the camera turns back onto the photographer, like Henri Cartier-Bresson being caught in the frame. You know, he was famous as a photographer for never having his photograph taken. So it's like turning the camera back and catching the Henri in the frame of the camera, and that what happens is that when that kind of a question is asked, who is watching this, or what is it that's aware of this, then you're not looking for a conceptual answer, but rather by posing that kind of a question in the sort of stillness and quietness of the mind, then there's the intuitive wisdom is being activated that recognizes who is the wrong question. It's not a who. That's presuming something that isn't the fact. Oh. So it can be a very short interruption. It can be like half a second or a second before the thinking mind jumps in and says, "Well, it's me," you know. But the way this practice works is to keep the attention on that gap before all the self-creation starts up again. In that moment of, oh, it's not a who, oh, and just notice that the quality of awareness that's there when that self-creation is interrupted, when there's it's caused to hesitate, it's broken up for a moment. So I found that kind of a practice very, very helpful for that, in that respect. Also, rather than just questioning it, another approach is to inflate it, to say, I am watching, I am the knower, I am. And then, in a similar way, that by inflating it, it loses its strength. It's revealed as ridiculous, or like. But again, you're rousing that intuitive wisdom, recognizes that's absurd. That's not it at all. So you can use different approaches like that, and it's good to experiment. But I found both of those can be very helpful in bringing about that effect of, say, interrupting the habitual self-creation, the I-making and mind-making, which is a very, very powerful force. Very strong conditioning. But I can guarantee you won't be able to turn around quick enough to catch the. You'll just get a crick in your neck if you try that. Another image that Luang Por would use is about trying to see your own eyes. When we try to make awareness an object, rather than just being that knowing, trying to make awareness an object, it's like trying to see your own eyes. So frequently in Luang Por Sumedho's Dhamma talks, he would use that. And I found that's a really good sort of image to use. He would say, "I'm trying to find my eyes. They must be around here somewhere. I know I can see, so they must be here somewhere. Has anyone seen my eyes? I can't find my eyes anywhere." You think, well, but that's like trying to make awareness an object, because the very thing that is the means whereby it will be known is the thing that you're looking for. So it's like trying to look for your eyes, and so Luang Por would make it clear. I think it can be quite sort of seem quite ridiculous in putting it in that way, but we do tend to do that. Like, I want to make the awareness an object. I want to. I want to know the awareness, and it's sort of, it's like trying to see your own eyes. You can see a reflection of them in a mirror, but you can't actually see them because it's the very means whereby you're seeing. So rather than trying to make awareness an object, there's you find that in this letting go of the self-creation around that there is just a way of allowing the mind to embody that quality of knowing, and is essentially subjectless and objectless. It's just the mind is awake, and it's not fixing on an object, and it's not creating a subject. But the awareness, that quality of knowing, that vichar, is fully clarified. Then, of course, the thinking mind says, this is just being the knowing. This is what I'm being the knowing. That's what I am, but that's just another thought that's come into being, and the mind grabs that thought. So that the practice is, in a way, staying at the, if you can use the analogy, staying at the back wall of experience, of knowing, and that any kind of conceiving around that, like I am the knowing, I am aware, or I'm knowing the knowing. That's what I'm doing. That's always a stepping away, that the mind has, in a sense, stepped away from the actual quality of knowing, and has been brought into a thought about the knowing, or a conception that's created around that. And so that there's an essential quality of sort of relaxation and resting in that. Being that awake, aware quality without creating any sense of I, me, or mine around it. Or if the I ams arise and say, but I am aware, I am practicing, I am watching, that's recognized immediately as a mental formation that the mind has been born into in that moment. That makes sense? Any other questions? Yes, Gaspar.
Well, just to reflect on the techniques, so I was just wondering your thoughts on, there's a very peculiar technique that I've used sometimes that I found to result in, I think, to result in a very interesting feeling of absence, or which reminds me of these gaps that we've mentioned here. And it's basically to use the finger to point to objects, and starting from the furthest that you can see. For example, I see a column there, then I point to the pillow, and then I approach to my body. For example, I point to the knee, and then I point to the belly, and then I point to myself. And then suddenly, at least this is my experience, suddenly there is this blank, sort of unanswerable gap that is where, what am I pointing to? So it's kind of like turning this camera towards the photographer. So I was just wondering whether you think this would be useful. Thank you.
Well, my basic philosophy is, if it works, it's the right thing. Yeah, so there's a number of different techniques that people can use, and that it's good to experiment with things of that nature. There's a teacher who wrote a book called On Having No Head. I forget his... Douglas Harding, thank you. And that I think Luang Por Sumedho met him a few times, and he has a number of these kind of techniques of realizing that you have no head, and that and similarly is ways of developing an insight into not self, and to say explore the habits of self-creation and how much the mind invests in that, and learning how to have no head, to let go of self-view and conceit, and to be comfortable with that, and so that any kind of technique that works in an effective way, that's really say digestible, it is something that you can use in an ongoing way, and it has a beneficial effect, then fine, take it and use it. I hadn't used that particular method you're describing myself, but if you find that works, then that's fine. Yes, Maureen. Yeah. Could you use the microphone?
I guess since I was just going to share a technique that I was taught, kind of using, thinking of a little bit of Abhidhamma, like using mental factors. When, let's say you're taking an object, let's say you're on the breath, and that thought arises, who's aware of the breath? I was taught you can, to think of it as seeing it as a process. You'd say mindfulness is mindful of the breath. And then, let's say an unpleasant feeling is arising in your leg. Instead of identifying with that unpleasant feeling as like, oh, I'm in pain, it's who's feeling unpleasant feeling. Feeling is feeling unpleasant feeling. And it does it takes, for me, it kind of one step back, and then seeing that there's this whole mental process that's happening, and that the mental factors are just performing a function and passing away, and that we're constantly identifying them as who we are, but actually they're just performing a function, and so constantly seeing that functionality of the mind and mental factors.
Yeah, that's a very good way of doing it, because it's just a way of shifting the framework from the habit of personalizing everything to seeing things in terms of a natural order. That this is because the instinct is so strong in terms of I'm this person, I'm this individual being, and this is my experience, and this is what's happening for me, or this is what I'm doing. The conditioning to refer to experience and action in those ways is incredibly strong. So just rephrasing things and reframing the way the mind holds what's going on can have a very very powerful effect, because it has that same sense of interrupting the habitual ways of seeing and holding it. And but the point of these kind of practices also, it's applying the method is one thing, but it's the change of heart that it brings about. That's the real purpose of it. So that it's good to be bearing that in mind, along with just using that sort of like a different way of naming things or framing things. That then it's those moments of and where the mind really sees it and holds the flow of experience in a very, very different way. That's the fruit of that kind of practice. Because in that moment, then there really is the quality of the mind free of grasping. There's that blend of clarity, simplicity, peacefulness, and alertness is all there. So getting to know that quality, here's the mind free of identification, free of grasping, and it's like this, it feels this way. So the more that is fully recognized and is say acknowledged, and sort of see, this is the basis. When the mind is free of grasping, it's like this. it's free of obstructions, when that quality of awareness is clarified, it's like this, then that becomes a very helpful baseline. That becomes sort of the reference point, or the baseline for experience. And then it becomes easier to notice when the mind has sort of departed from that baseline, when things are being put in terms of me and mine, and where I'm getting to, or what I need to get rid of, what I need to get hold of, and that's much more, all the selfing, the I making and mind making is more obvious. That sort of departure from that becomes more apparent. Okay, so I'll continue. Then we meditate on the vijnana khandha, consciousness, the sensory consciousness of the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, and how one thing goes to another, aware of the movements of consciousness of the senses. Looking at something, hearing something, this changes very rapidly. All these 5 khandhas are anicca, impermanent. When we chant Rupang Aniccang, Vedana Anicca, Sanya Anicca, Sankhara Anicca, Vijnanang Aniccang, this is very profound. Then we chant Sabbe Sankhara Anicca. Sankhara here means all conditioned phenomena, all sensory experience, the sense organs, the objects of the sense organs, the consciousness that arises on contact, all this is sankhara and is anicca. All is conditioned. So sankhara here includes the other 4 khandhas, rupa, vedana, sanya, and vijnana. With this, you have a perspective from which the conditioned world is infinitely variable and complex. But where do you separate sanya from sankhara, or sankhara from vijnana? It's best not to try to make precise divisions between these 5 aggregates. They're just convenient means for looking at things, helping you to meditate on mental states, the physical world and the sensory world. We're not trying to fix anything as permanently sankhara or definitely sanya, but just using these labels to observe that the sensory world, from the physical to the mental, from coarse to refined, is conditioned, and all conditioned phenomena are impermanent. Then you have a way of seeing the totality of the conditioned world as impermanent, rather than getting involved in it all. In this practice of insight meditation, we're not trying to analyze the conditioned world, but to detach from it, to see it in a perspective. This is when you really begin to comprehend anicca. You insightfully know that sabbe sankhara anicca. But as we were addressing yesterday, and there's a lot of overlap, and also I think the day before, there's a lot of overlap between the different khandhas, and that they are a rough grouping, a set of groups that is a convenient way of slicing up the pie of experience. But they overlap a lot, and we can say use the different words in different ways and according to different situations. What Luang Por is pointing to here is that the word sankhara, it can mean mental formations, like in the 5 khandhas. The sankhara khandha there is referring to thoughts, emotions, intentions, memories, imagination, or sort of mental activity, but it also is used in a much broader sense, so that the English word thing can easily and properly be translated as sankhara. And so that in the chanting, when we are doing the morning chanting, sabbe sankhara anicca, in that particular phrase, it doesn't just mean mental formations. It means every kind of thing. So the body is a sankhara, the temple here is a sankhara, the world, the universe is a sankhara, as well as mental formations and ideas and emotions and moods and so forth, so that it's being used in a very much broader sense in that particular phraseology. But as Luang Por points out, it's best not to try and make precise divisions between the 5 aggregates, but they are just being used as a convenient and informal division for the different aspects of experience. So any thoughts and beliefs that you have are just conditions. But I'm not saying that you shouldn't believe in anything. I'm just pointing out a way to see things in perspective, so you're not deluded by them. We won't grasp the experience of emptiness or the unconditioned, the deathless, as a personal attainment. Some of you have been grasping that one as a kind of personal attainment, haven't you? I know emptiness, I've realized emptiness. And patting yourselves on the back. That's not sabbe Dhamma anatta, that's grasping the unconditioned, making it into a condition, me and mine. When you start thinking of yourself as having realized emptiness, you can see that also as a condition of the mind. Sabbe Dhamma anatta. All things are not self, not a person, not a permanent soul, not a self of any sort. That's very important to contemplate also, because sabbe Dhamma includes all things, both the conditioned phenomena of the sensory world and the unconditioned, the deathless. This is a tricky area where, and it's often a case of the mind. One of the reasons why Luang Por Sumedho, Luang Por Chah wouldn't make a big thing about levels of attainment and realization or levels of jhana and such like, but rather using the contemplation of sabbe sankhara anicca, everything is impermanent, everything is not sure, and that in Luang Por Chah's Dhamma talks as well, he would emphasize that when the mind wants to make some kind of a claim, I've realized stream entry, or I've seen the deathless, I know the unconditioned, it would be a strong encouragement to pay close attention how the mind is holding this particular experience. It's not as though there hasn't been some kind of insight into the deathless, into the unconditioned, but what is the mind doing with that? How is the mind holding that? Because it can be the case that in a moment of great clarity, yes, the deathless has genuinely been realized. In that moment, that's absolutely the case. But half a second later, in comes the I making and mind making, and says, "Oh, I've realized the deathless. I must be a stream enterer," and that the I am has just taken hold of that experience and the idea of it, the memory of it, and turned it into a personal possession, a personal attainment. And so that then that realization of the deathless is then occluded, it's then masked by the I am taking hold of it and claiming it and assuming the role of being an owner or an achiever or an attainer. So that oftentimes when talking about this, Luang Por Sumedho would make a point of using the word realizing or realization, and he almost never would use attainment as a way of speaking about these qualities, and I feel that's a significant point. That again, you can say, "I have realized," but it's a little less achievement oriented, or a little less self-based or self-inflated a term, because it's something that's very attractive, very appealing, and we come into the sangha with the aim of realizing nibbana. When we take the pabaja and have the ordination ceremonies, the part of the wording that we use is sabba dukkha nissarana, in order to cross over, to let go of all dukkha, to relinquish all dukkha. Nibbana Satchit Karanatthaya, in order to realize Nibbana. That's why we're going forth. That's why we shave our heads and put on these robes. So it's, yes, Nibbana Satchit Karanatthaya, to realize, to make that real, to see the truth of Nibbana. That's the aim. That's stating that as a goal, as a direction. So that's very much a part of it. But then what Luang Por Chah, Luang Por Sumedho would highlight so often is how insidious, how easily the I-making and mind-making habit gets control or gets involved in and influences that quality of realization, and it can then be very, very obstructive and make things difficult for yourself and the people that you live with, and so that. Even though someone might have had a very powerful meditation experience and something that is quite transformative, it's not that experience was not valid or a genuine insight at that time, but in a way the most important thing is, what does the mind do with that? What do the thoughts, the memories, the ideas, the habits of self-creation, what do they do with the memory of that experience, or the implications that come from that experience? And so that's an area to be sort of very, very attentive to. There's a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya that's very so explicitly about this. It's called the 5 and the 3, the Panchataya Sutta. So it's Sutta number 102 in the Majjhima. And in the end of the sutta, so towards the closing of the sutta, the Buddha's describing. So there might be someone who's meditating, and their mind is very, very quiet. The heart is free of any apparent kilesas, and then sitting there meditating, they have the thought, "I am at peace. I am without clinging. I have realized nibbana." And then he points out the very way that the mind phrases that experience indicates the clinging that is still there. And in the Wisdom Publications translation of that, it's I think Bhikkhu Bodhi has it. The I is both italic and underlined. I think in the Wisdom edition is that I am at peace. I am without clinging. I have realized nibbana. And it's like the I is very much at work there, and so the Buddha points out he's not saying that experience is not wholesome and not valid, but look at what the mind is doing with it. And then he goes on to say that the skillful way of relating to that kind of experience is to recognize the arising, and disappearing of sensory perceptions so the arising and fading of sensory perceptions, the gratification, the kind of pleasant quality, the asada, and then the liability, the adinava, and then the escape, the nisarana, with respect to all of the 6 sense spheres, so that even with beautiful, wholesome, bright mind states, to know, this is something that has arisen, knowing the origin of it and the disappearance, that it's an impermanent condition, knowing the gratification, like, this is blissful, this is beautiful, this is lovely, this is desirable, and then seeing the liability, the adinava. That if this is clung to or this is identified with, then this is going to bring dukkha, and then nisarana, the recognizing that therefore the skillful way to relate to even these beautiful, wholesome, noble experiences is non-identification, is to relate to them with non-grasping and not to build an I, a me, or a mine around that. So that's a sutta is very well worth getting to know, and particularly that passage at the end. And to me, that gives a very helpful framework to know the origin, the disappearance, the gratification, the danger, and the escape with respect to the 6 sense spheres. That's a good framework to hold in mind, especially as the retreat time continues, and we have more opportunity to practice a lot of solitary meditation, or the mind gets quieter and quieter, and the likelihood of having more sort of peaceful and bright mental states gets stronger, gets more likely, and those experiences are more apparent. It's a very helpful way of say, holding that, in knowing that even these wholesome, beautiful states, they arise, they pass away, There's a gratifying quality, asada. There's a, yes, this is delightful, this is good, at last. And then the adinava, and the asada and adinava, they're a pair, the gratification and the danger or the liability, the upside and the downside. That there is this sweetness, but then there is the liability that it is an event, it's a perception, and if it's identified with or grasped, then necessarily that identification will bring dukkha with it. And then the nisarana, the escape or the means of transcendence, that is letting go, is non-attachment, non-identification. So to continue. Notice that Buddhists make no claim for deathlessness as being a self either. Quote, I have an immortal soul, or, quote, God is my true nature, unquote. The Buddha avoided all statements of that nature. Any possible conceiving of oneself as anything at all is an obstacle to enlightenment. Because you attach to an idea again, to a concept of self as being part of something. Maybe you think there's a piece of you, a little soul, that joins the bigger one at death. That's a conception of the mind that you can know. We're not saying it's untrue or false, but we're just being the knowing what can be known. We don't feel compelled to grasp that as a belief. We see it as only something that comes out of the mind, a condition of the mind, so we let even that go. And this is a common image that you get within spiritual traditions, let's say within the Vedas, the idea of the Atman being reunited with Brahman, the sort of the individual essence being reunited with the Brahman, the kind of absolute reality. Or as Sir Edwin Arnold put it at the end of The Light of Asia, the dewdrop slips into the shining sea, as a sort of image of the parinibbana, or the end of the Buddha's passing away. That the Buddha specifically avoided that kind of the kind of language, and I think Luang Por Sumedho puts it absolutely brilliantly here, that it's a conception of the mind that you can know, that we're not saying it's untrue or false, but we're just being the knowing what can be known. So that kind of, becoming one with everything, or being reunited with the Absolute, it's notable that the Buddha doesn't use that kind of language. And there's one or two suttas where he talks about that in this, using the kind of language that you would find in the Vedas, of saying that even in relationship not just to the all, the sabba, the kind of the whole universe, but he even talks about it in terms of relating to nibbana. He says he does not conceive the all, does not conceive being a part of the all, does not conceive becoming one with the all. Well, why is that? Because they have understood the all. He does not conceive himself as in nibbana, as apart from nibbana, or as getting nibbana, or as dissolving into nibbana. Why is that? Because of having understood nibbana. And I'm not quoting that absolutely accurately, but I think it's in the another the suttas in the Majjhima Nikaya. I think it's maybe even the sutta number 1, the root of all things, the Mula Pariyaya Sutta. Again, I'm not absolutely sure about that, but it's using that kind of a language that would say that not conceiving yourself as apart from the all, and then dissolving into the all, or becoming one with the all, or being separated from the all, or being the all. That any kind of conceiving is necessarily creating dukkha, and that it's an extraordinarily acute and accurate way of phrasing things. I find it can take a little bit of contemplation to get a sense of what that means, but I feel that the kind of spiritual model that the Buddha would have grown up with, like that kind of the idea of the Atman separated from Brahman, and the spiritual journey is to get reunited with Brahman, with the absolute. He grew up with that kind of concept around, and part of the insight of his enlightenment and forming the basis of his teaching is that, well, even talking in that way of somehow being separate and getting reunited with everything, or becoming one with everything, is like, that doesn't help. That's not an accurate portrayal of how it is. So it's best not to talk in that way. And so. And often in these kind of teachings, I think it's there in the Mula Pariyaya Sutta. Again, I'm not 100% sure I'm remembering that correctly. He says, I teach one thing, suffering and the end of suffering. That he sort of brings it back to the very momentary experience of the mind through any kind of grasping whatsoever that creates the causes of dukkha. And so that rather than trying to get the perfect philosophical framework that represents the sort of absolute sort of condition of things and how the universe works, he keeps bringing the attention back to dukkha and the ending of dukkha. If there's grasping, then it's going to be of anything whatsoever, whether it's subtle or coarse or internal or external, obvious or not obvious, then there's going to be dukkha coming from that. So he says, now and as formerly what I teach is suffering and the end of suffering, full stop. Which can be a bit frustrating to the philosophers amongst us who like to have a map of the universe and how everything, have a picture of how it all fits together. But I feel it's part of the Buddha's great wisdom that he realizes, no, it doesn't really help to have that kind of a metaphysical, to depend upon a big, sort of large-scale metaphysical framework, but rather to keep things very practical, very direct, and to see, because of grasping, there's dukkha. If there's no grasping, there's no dukkha. So in that light, another very useful teaching to be acquainted with is in the again in the Majjhima Nikaya, the Chula Tanha Sankhaya Sutta, the shorter discourse on the destruction of craving. And in that, this is where the Buddha says, he uses this phrase, Sabhe Dhamma Nalang Abhinivesaya. Sabhe Dhamma, all things, all aspects of reality, Nalang should not be Abhinivesaya, should not be grasped at or attached to, should not be clung to. Sabhe Dhamma Nalang Abhinivesaya. So he said, if you've heard this, you've heard everything. If you've understood this, you've understood everything. If you've practiced this, you've practiced everything. If you've realized this, you've realized everything. And that isn't quite a statement that okay, this is all the information you need to know. Like, if you've heard this, you've heard everything. If you've practiced this, you've practiced everything. Yeah, and so that it's a way of summarizing the entire teaching. Don't cling to anything. Just that's the kind of synopsis of the entire teaching. And so it's a very emphatic and I think a very significant statement that we have of the Buddha. Yeah, don't cling to anything. Sabhe Dhamma Nalang Abhinivesaya. And that if we really take that to heart and just see every place that the mind likes to clinging to self-criticism, clinging to self-praise, clinging to criticism of other people or praising other people, clinging to objects, to memories, to plans, to opinions, to moods, whatever it might be, irrespective of what it is, the object of clinging, whatever the mind hangs on to, that is where dukkha is generated. And so if that principle of nothing whatsoever should be grasped at or clung to, if that's applied, then that is a way of ending dukkha in every dimension of our being, of our life. Keep that formula. All conditions are impermanent. All things are not self, for reflection. And then whatever happens in your life, as you live it, you can see Sabbe Sankhara Anicca, Sabbe Dhamma Anatta. It keeps you from being deluded. If miraculous phenomena happen to you, and it's a way of understanding other religious conventions. Christians come along and say, only through Jesus Christ can you be saved. You can't be saved through Buddhism. Buddha was only a man, but Jesus Christ was the Son of God. So you think, oh, I wonder, maybe they're right. After all, when you go to one of these born-again meetings, everyone's radiating happiness. Their eyes are bright and they say, praise the Lord. When you go to a Buddhist monastery and just sit there for hours on end watching your breath, you don't get high like that. So you might start doubting and think, maybe that's right. Maybe Jesus is the way. But what you can know is that there's a doubt. Look at that doubt, or the feeling of being intimidated by other religions when they come on strong, or feeling averse to them, or having prejudices against religions. What you can know is that these are perceptions of the mind. They come and go and change. Keep a constant, cool reflection on these things, rather than trying to figure them out or feel that you have to justify being a Buddhist. Christians may say, you don't do anything for the third world. And you say, we chant, we share merit, and we radiate loving kindness. That sounds pretty weak in a situation where you're talking about malnutrition and starvation in Africa. But now, at this time, there's this opportunity to understand the limits of what you can do. All of us would definitely do something about starvation in Africa if we could, if we felt that there was something one individual could do here and now at this time. Reflect on this. What is the real problem at this time? Is it the problem of starvation in Africa, or is it human selfishness and ignorance? Isn't starvation in Africa the result of human greed, selfishness and stupidity? Therefore, we open our minds to the Dhamma. We wisely reflect on it and then realize it. Truth is to be realized and known within the context of personal experience. But the practice is a continuous one. I still practice all the time. Things change. People praise and blame. The world goes on. One just keeps reflecting on it through sabbe sankhara anicca, sabbe dhamma anatta. When you recognize the conditioned and the unconditioned, you have what is called the ability to develop the path, and there's no more confusion about that. The goal now is to realize nibbana, or the deathless, or non-attachment, to realize what it's like not to be attached to the five khandhas. Realize that when you're sitting here and you're really at peace. There's no attachment to the five khandhas then, but you might make a perception out of that peacefulness and attach to that. And always try to meditate in order to become peaceful again, according to a perception. That's why the practice is continuously letting go, rather than an attainment. Sometimes when you become calm on a retreat, you can have a very peaceful mind, and you attach to it. So you meditate in order to attain that blissful state again. But insight meditation means looking into the nature of things, of the five khandhas, seeing them as anicca, impermanent, as dukkha, unsatisfactory. None of these khandhas have the ability to give you any kind of permanent satisfaction. Their very nature is unsatisfactory and anatta. Start to investigate and wisely consider sabbe sankhara anicca, sabbe dhamma anatta, rather than thinking you've attained something or that you've got to hold on to that attainment, and start to resent anybody who gets in your way. Note what is attachment. When your mind is really concentrated, let go of it. Rather than just indulging in that peaceful feeling, attach to something, worry about something. Do it deliberately so that you begin to see how you go out and grasp things or worry about losing them. In your practice, as you begin to understand and experience letting go, you begin to realize what Buddhas know. Sabbe sankhara anicca, sabbe dhamma anatta. It's not just a string of words. Even a parrot can say the words, but it's not an enlightened parrot. Insight is different from conceptual knowledge. But now you're penetrating, going deep into this, breaking through the illusion of self as being anything at all, or nothing. If you believe that you don't have a self, that's another belief. I believe I don't have a self. We believe in no self. You see that the Buddha pointed to the way between those two extremes of believing that you have a self and believing that you don't have a self. You cannot find anything in the five khandhas which is a permanent self or soul. Things arise out of the unconditioned. They go back to the unconditioned. It's therefore through letting go, It's therefore through letting go, not through adopting any other attitude, that we seek to no longer attach to mortal conditions. So there's many useful things in there. I think Luang Por's, particularly Luang Por's encouragement, rather than just indulging in that peaceful feeling, attach to something, worry about something. Do it deliberately, so that you begin to see how you go out and grasp things or worry about losing them. That's, I think, an advanced practice because most of us, peace is something that's very elusive and very, very attractive, so that when those peaceful times come, there's a definite sense of so a natural relief, like coming in out of the cold into a nice warm place, or in a hot country coming out of the heat into the shade. So there's a natural appeal of that, those peaceful times. But as I think that winter retreat of '88 was progressing, then Luang Por was encouraging, don't just get lost in that peaceful quality, that peaceful feeling, but worry about something, look for something to get upset about or get worried about, just to be able to see how the mind works, to not be afraid to bring objects into the mind, to explore them, to reflect on them, and to develop your quality of understanding and non-attachment and non-grasping. Any comments, questions, thoughts? Yes, Roman. Once again, 7 o'clock has come round already, so try to keep it short. That's all.
Ajahn, my question is about recollection of death. You mentioned yesterday about once you bought a ticket to the spiritual journey, so to speak, then there's no returning at some point. And it reminded me of, I heard when I was a teenager, I don't know if it was in biology class or something, I read or heard that if you throw a frog into a pot with boiling water, it will jump out right away. But if it's lukewarm water and you slowly heat it up, then the frog will be caught in that pot because it won't be able to jump out again. And I think spiritual practice from a certain point is the same. And so I guess my question is about the willingness to die before we die. At the outset of spiritual practice, we might do it because we want to be calmer, or I know we think it's lofty or something. But then we gradually see what it's really about. And I find the recollection of death very helpful for myself right now. That's kind of what my practice revolves around. And could you speak on the willingness to die before one dies, and also why paradoxically reflecting on the foulness of the body and skeleton and things like that in death can bring great joy, because it sounds very morbid, but it doesn't feel morbid in meditation?
There's a few things in there. So this was a common expression that Luang Por Chah would use. In the Thai language, it's dai kon dai. The word for to die in English is the same as in Thai. Dai kon dai. Die before you die. And sometimes when people came to ask to stay at Wat Pong, Luang Por Chah would say, "Why have you come here?" And they say, "Oh, I want to study with you, Luang Por. I want to be enlightened." And he'd say, "Well, it's better if you come here to die." Or that the opportunity you have is to die here. Have you come here to die? But no, I've come here to get enlightened. So that he was quite active, quite regularly using that imagery, and that to die before you die it's a lot to do with letting go of the self-centered patterns of thinking. Your where you think your life is going, or what you want to do with your future, or the story you tell about who you are and what you aspire to. It's about letting go of those creations. It doesn't mean to say that you physically wish to drop dead, but rather that there's that readiness to let go of all of those self-created habits and self-created programs. Another phrase that Luang Por Chah would use very often is to say a samana, a monastic, has no future. If you're really practicing with the heart of a samana, a renunciant, then you have no future. You're not thinking in terms of what you're going to do later or what's going to happen tomorrow or next year, but rather there's a complete letting go of that. There's a non-self-creation. And so that's a very helpful way of getting perspective on those deeply rooted habits of self-centered thinking, and how ready are we to let go, to drop everything? Are you ready to say, let this life end right now? And so that it's a skillful way of reflecting and getting perspective on those habits of attachment to the body, to the personality, to our own personal story, and to see those as genuinely empty. There's no thing there, and that's the habits of conditioning are generally very, very strong for us, and so that kind of way of reflecting and to meet those sort of patterns of thinking and those aspirations with that kind of bluntness of are you ready to drop the whole thing? Are you ready to drop your story? Are you ready to die? Have you come here to die? And that is a challenge to the habits of self-centered thinking. Even the noble the noble aspirations that we have, or more sort of wholesome or noble qualities of self-centered thinking, is to get a perspective on all of that. And I think the reflections on death and the mortality of the body and the skeleton and the body parts and such like, it's joyful insofar as there's a joy that comes with non-possession, non-owning, that none of this belongs to me. It's not something that really has to be carried around. The heart doesn't have to be burdened with this. There's a relief that comes with that sense of non-ownership. When the Buddha described Nibbana, he said it's a place of non-possession. It's a quality of not owning, and so that reflecting on the body in that kind of a different way, and the ownerless and compounded nature of the body, it supports that quality of recognizing that it's ownerless, and then the quality of peace, the peacefulness that comes from that, is a natural result of this isn't me or mine. This can't be owned. This doesn't belong to me. So it's challenging to the ego that likes to own things and be the possessor and the owner, but it's simultaneously sort of relieving and liberating for the heart. So that's often a mixture of both challenging to the ego and liberating to the heart. That's a familiar flavor of that you encounter in Dhamma practice. So I'll leave it there for today.